Well, parental alienation is a spectrum disorder which affects families across the world. It affects children of all ages. It is something which occurs in the post-separation landscape. It's something that's existed for many, many decades, and I think now we're reaching a point where we're starting to recognise that a child who says vehemently, "I'm not going to see a parent after family separation," is a child that's waving a red flag. We've been in a situation where we've ignored children's voices in terms of how they are affected by family separation for many years. In fact, what we've done is we've overburdened children with decision-making power that is not appropriate for them. And now I think we're coming to a place where we're starting to recognise that parental alienation, when a child rejects one parent and idealises the other, is something that we all need to take notice of and we all need to do something about. Is rejection of a parent serious for a child? It absolutely is. To reject a parent is a very unnatural thing for a child to do. We are born helpless into the world and we attach to our primary caregivers as a way of avoiding being abandoned, and our biggest fear is that we will be abandoned. And unfortunately what happens to children in these circumstances is that they are forced to reject a parent against their natural way of being in the world, and then they're forced to live with and suffer the consequences of that, which are very, very deep and they're long lasting. And one of the problems about alienation is that we don't readily see the impact on the child in the here and now. What we see is the impact of the child much further down the line. So what we see in a child who becomes alienated, who chooses to use the, and I say chooses in inverted commas, the defence mechanism of psychological splitting, is that because they have adopted splitting, which is a defence, that part of themselves and their experience which they cannot reconcile any longer because of the circumstances that they're in is split off and hidden from them. Now, we in the outside world can't see that. If the child's leg were broken and the cause of that broken leg were one of their parents, we would all readily be able to say, this is a problem and we have to intervene. But because the child has split their mind as a defence caused by one parent and we can't see it, we let it be. Culturally, society-wise, we've allowed this to happen decade after decade. And what we have now are adult children who are alienated, who suffered psychological splitting in their childhood, who are struggling and who are facing all of the consequences of having made that awful choice in the post-separation landscape in their childhood. And so for a child to reject a parent is not just about the dreadfulness of murdering a parent who is still alive and saying, I no longer want to have you in my consciousness. It's about the way that that child has murdered part of themselves and has then been forced to live with it. And it's only when that child comes into their young adulthood that perhaps the gravest consequences of what they've been forced to do really starts to come to light. The most severe consequences of having rejected a parent and not having received help are seen when children come to transition points in their lives. So they find it very difficult to trust the inner self because the inner self is fractured and broken. Sometimes they will say to me that they feel as if they're living with a ghost, a part of themselves that they don't have any access to. Sometimes they will spend a great deal of time trying to work out how to relate to other people, but failing to do that because they have internalized a hero and villain narrative. Someone is very, very wonderful and then very, very bad. And so the splitting will manifest itself in different ways as they come into their older years. Their relationships are fragile. Their sense of self is fragile. And what many children say to me when they come into therapy is that their sense of authenticity, it's not available to them. I want to feel wholly me, but there are parts of me missing. I don't know where those parts are. and I don't know why I feel like this. I've reconnected to my mother, I've reconnected to my father, I'm now in touch with both sides of my family. I should feel whole, but I don't. There are parts of me missing, and I don't know how to get a sense of authenticity. The fragmenting of the self, the creation of splits and schisms, is something which not only occurs once in the child as they're forced to reject a parent in childhood, but further splits begin to occur. And why would that not be in many ways? If your integrated sense of self is fractured in childhood, then the very wiring of your brain is going to be impacted. And so the normal developmental processes which come when the brain wires itself because you're in normal attachment relationships with people are interfered with. And so people will speak of not having the same executive skills as people of the same age. They will wonder how other people can be confident and certain about themselves when they are floundering. In therapy with adult children, and they begin to recover, what we find is the same thing over and over again. They go back to the age that they were when the original split occurred, and they begin the developmental process. And if they have a parent who understands and is well and healthy, then they can be reparented back to full health. And it doesn't take very long, but they can be reparented back to health. The tragedy for too many of these kids is that they only realise that there's a real problem in their own mind until they're too old to reconnect because the parent has died. And that's the biggest tragedy of all. In many of the alienated parents that we work with are children who were alienated themselves. They may not realise it, but actually when we start to work with them, they recognise that that was part of their trauma story too. Transgenerational trauma repetition is something that we look for when we're assessing a family, and we will often find unusual patterns of behaviours in families where a child has rejected a parent and has become aligned with the other. But that's just the top level story. That's just the door that opens. Beyond that, what we see are patterns of very strong enmeshment and very strong idealisation, which are mirrored through the generations. So if we go up a generation, we'll see that the mom, who is very, very enmeshed with her daughter, was also enmeshed with her mother. We'll see that the father, who has parentified his daughter or brought her into an inappropriate spouseified relationship, is also in a very enmeshed relationship with his mother. And so these patterns of behaviour have been passed down the generation and normalised. And we think from research, Jill Solberg particularly talks about transgenerational trauma being handed down through the generations through the attachment processes. And it's a complex issue. To feel authentic, a child has to attach to every part of a primary caregiver, the negative as well as the positive, the spoken as well as the unspoken. And what we find is that particularly in cases where perhaps a mother has been sexually abused in childhood and she's not been able to reveal it, and her child at the age of 9, the same age that she was when she was sexually abused, now accuses daddy of having touched her inappropriately. What we find is that in these circumstances, the mother's inability to express and resolve the trauma is passed in the interpsychic relationship, the relationship between the mind of the mother and the mind of the child. And when her daughter reports sexual abuse, there is comfort for the mother, because someone else is suffering in the way that she suffered. And these trauma transmissions and trauma repetitions are very much unexplored in parental alienation. Yes, trauma passes through the generations, through the attachment relationship. And we have some very, very high functioning people in the world. who decompensate when the family separates. The family separation is a very, very highly stressful, difficult environment for people to live through. And so for those very high-functioning individuals who you may not ever have seen any signs that this was coming, the breakdown of the family allows the trauma to come through into the here and now. But the trauma isn't in the here and now. The child isn't being abused in the here and now, but somebody was being abused. Somebody at some point was being abused. And so what we have to look for in these cases, and they have a particular quality, is whose trauma story are we listening to? What I want to get children to do is tell me what happened to them, what is happening to them, in ways other than words. And for younger children, drawing and using different materials is a very good way to get them to show you. So I ask them to show me how much love they feel for this person, how much love they feel for that person, how much love do you feel for the dog? And they'll readily tell you, oh, the love for mummy poured into daddy because daddy didn't want us to love mummy. Or they'll tell us that the love for mummy, for daddy, had to go into my feet. Oh, what is the love for daddy in your feet? Well, it means that I can put my shoes on and mum can't see it when I go to daddy's, because if she sees it, she cries. So they'll tell you what's happening to them without you ever having to ask the question, tell me what's happening to you.